Welcome to the Slow Travel Network webinar on how slow travel impacts local communities. Today, we are very excited to have with us two inspiring guests. We will have Sarah Payne, Director of Impact at UnTours Foundation, and Stuart McDonald, who is co-founder of Travelfish and also a complete expert about Southeast Asia. They will be sharing some real-life initiatives that demonstrate how local communities can successfully be part of the tourism equation. We will address several topics throughout the webinar, such as the connection between slow travel and impact driven initiatives, the Reset Tourism Fund, tourism investment reaching local communities, Southeast Asian tourism economy, and what brands and destinations can improve on. So, you may already know me from the two previous webinars about the Slow Travel Network. My name is Lucia Prieto, and I will be your moderator today. I work at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, but today I am also here representing the MID Network, which is an association of Mediterranean protected areas that are developing ecotourism products that have a low ecological impact and also a positive socioeconomic impact on local communities. Thank you so much to everyone who is watching us live. We are live streaming this webinar on UnTours and Travel Massive channels. So now is the moment to drop a comment and let us know where you are watching us from. For example, me, I am joining you from Malaga, Spain. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar for our guests, feel free to post them. And Maria, who is helping us on the backstage, will pop your questions and comments on the screen. In this webinar, what we want to do is to highlight the importance of slow travel for local communities. And this webinar, as I said, is part of the Slow Travel Network, which was launched by UnTours, the first B Corp in the world, and is a way to highlight how the tourism industry and travelers are doing good things for the planet through slow travel. Anyone can join the Slow Travel Network, it's free to join. I think that Maria will share a link on the comment section so you can go directly to it, but you can also go to Travel Massive and search on the search bar Slow Travel Network and hit the join button. We are very thankful for the support of UnTours for these webinars and for giving us the opportunity to speak about slow travel and sustainability. You can learn more about UnTours and the UnTours Foundation in the links in the description of this webinar. So now I will shut up and welcome on screen our first guest for today, Sarah. Hello, Sarah. Hi, Stuart. How you doing?
Hi there. Good. How are you?
Good.
Yep.
Where are
All
you
good.
joining us from?
I am joining from San Francisco, California, here in the United States.
And you, Stuart?
I'm in Bali, Indonesia.
Wow. Such different locations of the three of us. So
Yeah.
if before we start with the conversation, if you can quickly introduce yourself, Sarah, and then Stuart, tell us a little bit about you, your organization, and what you do in your life.
Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction. I'm so happy to be here and to be chatting with you all, and Stuart, to be having this conversation with you. I'm Director of Impact at the UnTours Foundation, which we own UnTours, the travel company, which, as you mentioned, is the world's first certified B Corporation. So we're super excited about that. And basically, we invest 100% of our endowment into businesses at the forefront of tackling the climate crisis, of tackling injustice, as well as trying to create positive social and environmental impact in the world. So that's a bit about us. We recently launched earlier this year the Reset Tourism Fund, which is $10 million fund that's focused specifically on investing in world-changing businesses in the travel and tourism industry. And so that's kind of how we tie into all of this work. And yeah, just really excited to dive in and share some more about the fund, some more about slow travel and how we do that at UnTours, and chat about, again, how we can have this positive impact in local communities, the kind that we want to have, and mitigate, the negative impact of travel and tourism.
Yeah, we will have some specific questions about the Reset Tourism Fund. So keep stay with us and wait for them. And also, Stuart, if you can tell us a little bit about you and your project.
Okay. My name is Stuart McDonald. I'm Australian, but I'm been running around in Southeast Asia since 1993. In 2004, my wife and I started Travelfish.org, which is like a online guidebook to Southeast Asia. We're both reformed backpackers, I guess you'd say, or backpackers that grew up or something like that. And as the years have gone over, next year is actually our 20th anniversary of the website, not of us being married. And as we've moved around the region, the site has slowly grown. And pre-pandemic, we had a team of writers that were helping us put the material together. When the pandemic hit, obviously business slowed down. And so I started Couchfish, which is a newsletter that we designed to sort of take travel to people who were stuck on the couch. And it traces a fantasy itinerary through Southeast Asia. But as time went on, I got much more involved in commenting on sustainable tourism and where tourism is going in Southeast Asia, and thinking and writing about how things could be done in different ways that would be better for local people, better for the environment, and so on and so forth.
Great. So thank you so much to both of you. And now, before getting into the Q&A and asking you some questions, we thought that it would be a great thing to do at the beginning if you could share with us some examples that you know about tourism projects and initiatives that are actually making an impact on local communities. So I don't know, Sarah, if you want to start sharing some of the initiatives you have in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one I'll highlight just selfishly is UnTours, so the travel company that we
Well done.
operate. Because yeah, exactly. I mean, the company was started back in the 1970s by a really cool entrepreneur named Hal Tossig that was really passionate about this very topic, about slow travel, about how do we interact with communities in a way that is responsible and culturally enhancing, and one that's really going to bring the most meaning to the traveler. So, we offer these 7 to 10 day trips to Europe where you're staying in one place. We can get to know the local people in the community. And as we have this conversation, I think we'll circle back to that, as you have in previous webinars, just really making these meaningful connections with people. And the way that you do that is by traveling slowly, by getting curious, by making yourself vulnerable to a place, by opening your eyes up and being willing to experience whatever may arise without being overscheduled, without trying to drop into too many places and snap the pictures. We really believe, and I personally believe that travel isn't something that you consume; it's something that you experience, which I think is difficult for Americans sometimes. I'll just put myself out there and say that. So with UnTours, again, we're really focused on those longer trips, fewer destinations, lesser footprint, and really immersing yourself. The other example that I will highlight, we recently did a pitch competition in Hokkaido, Japan, with the Adventure Travel Trade Association, and we were highlighting, we selected from a number of applicants to compete in this pitch, companies that were, again, positively integrating social and environmental impact. And the winner of this pitch was an eco lodge in Ecuador in the Amazon rainforest that is 100% indigenous owned. It's 100% solar powered. It's a really amazing model that was basically the community came together. They were seeing how the other parts of the country were interacting with the outside world as economic development kind of came to the region, and decided they wanted to forge their own way of how they wanted to develop their communities. And they chose ecotourism. So they began Kapawi Eco Lodge. And so again, it's welcoming travelers to experience their local cultures, but in a way that is very authentic, and it's all community directed. So I love the ownership model here, and they're really passionate about, when they bring in travelers, making it very intentional to slow down, to even stop, to pause on their life. They don't have Wi-Fi at the facility. I mean, you have to take a small plane to get there, which kind of just automatically screens out the kind of travelers that are coming to Kapawi. But as Juan Carlos says, he was the one that was pitching on behalf of the organization. It's really about disconnecting to reconnect with yourself, with the people in the local communities, with the people that you're traveling with. So I think they're a really great example of being very intentional about, when you travel there, it is an intentional slowing, and you can reap so many benefits from that. And the thing that I love about Kapawi as well is they really kind of seamlessly integrate having that low environmental footprint in the local communities, as well as creating economic livelihood opportunities for people in the local communities as well. So I think it's just a really great example of how slow travel can kind of incorporate all of those pillars. So yeah, those are just two examples that I wanted to highlight.
And I heard that the competition was pretty tough for the award, so I guess that it has to be a pretty good initiative to win it.
It was a high bar, yes, and we had a lot of really great initiatives. I would love to talk about all of them, but yes,
But we don't have the time for that.
don't have the time for that.
We will leave the link in any case if anyone wants to have a look at the other projects that were they're nominated for the award. So now let's move on to Stuart. If you want to share a couple of initiatives that you have in mind about local communities and how they can be integrated into slow travel.
Okay, thanks, Lucia. What I'm going to talk about first is a very small organization in Flores, Indonesia, called Daputara. In Flores is probably best known to foreign visitors for Komodo National Park, for the diving and all. Oh, there's Ratna and Chris. But for the diving and that kind of stuff, and it's from a town called Labuan Bajo, which the government has identified as a huge tourism development kind of thing. But this homestay is just, it's about 20 minutes, 30 minutes by motorbike into the interior from the coast. And it's run or was established by this woman from Flores called Liz. And she wanted to establish something to show the true flavors of Flores away from the commercial um, stuff in the big towers and big hotels and everything of Labuan Bajo. And we went there, my son and I went there just for lunch. And we actually went the previous day and they were closed. And they said, oh, you've got to book a day in advance because it takes 6 hours to cook the chicken.
Wow.
They smoke it. But I mean, like when you boil it down, when just making lunch takes 6 hours, then you're slowing down. And when I was talking to Ratna and Chris about the place, I asked, because it's very simple. It's solar powered. There's no Wi-Fi, which horrified my son. And I said, like, how long do people actually stay here? And they said, oh, like a week, a month, you know. And what they've done is they're working with a local school to identify kids who the founder Liz calls golden kids. And what she wants to do is impart the value of Floresian culture, of the people, their way of life, their food, the whole kit and caboodle into these kids, so that they're given options other than just making a bed in some great big hotel that is going to have zero job security. It's about owning your future. And talking to her, I interviewed Liz after visiting the site. It was really, really inspiring because so many people only go to Komodo. They don't go any further into the country. And Indonesia is littered with destinations like this where people fly in, see one thing, and leave. And there's a whole other island, which could really be a country, really, that is just sitting there begging. And so Liz has this vision of one day having a trail of these kind of establishments right across the island. And it was just super inspiring. And it's not fancy or anything like that. And it was a real lesson to me that you don't have to have huge financial support or anything like that to do something that's really making a difference. So that was one. And the other one, I'll be very quick with this, sorry, but is I'm just back from the Philippines, and I was on an island there called Malapascua, off the top end of Cebu. And it's famous for its diving with thresher sharks, which is why I was there. But while I was there, I visited what would you call it? A local organization called People in the Sea. And it's a collaborative effort between people from the island and some French people. And what they're doing is, because the island is tiny, and they work across three prongs, which is waste management, community development, and coral reef preservation. And they take volunteers in, but to volunteer there, you need to stay for at least 4 weeks. And it's totally administered by people from the island. And it was just, I went to chat with them for 20 minutes and ended up talking to them for like an hour and a half. And it was really, really inspiring. And one of the big things that you see with organizations that are taking volunteers, that they're very short stays. And so the staff you end up needing to hire people to look after the volunteers. And so this is it's a backwards kind of setup. So yeah, I just thought it was a really interesting project, and it was good to see some people looking a bit further into the future with the local community at the forefront.
Thank you so much for both of you for those two initiatives that were very impressive and that make us realize that there are many things being done, but we don't always know about them. So there's a future for slow travel and for linking it to the local communities. So as I say, we don't have much time to explain a lot more about these different initiatives, but we will make sure to put the links in the description so that you in the audience can have a look later on if you are interested in them. So now that we have these examples in mind of how organizations and businesses can work with local communities and the travel industry, we can move on to the Q&A session where we have some questions for you. And I thought that maybe we can start with you, Sarah, and actually get your input about how can we measure the impact that local communities are receiving from tourism projects. How can you measure it? Do you have any tools, for example, or how do you usually do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is something that a variety of organizations are trying to understand. How do you measure the impact of any community-based project, regardless of sector? So, there are some helpful frames for this. So, the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are really helpful frames. They're often too large to use those as specifically as your framework for measuring the impact of a specific project. But there are, a lot of underlying themes that are important to pay attention to. Same thing with, future of tourism principles. In terms of tools, the GSTC frameworks are really helpful for understanding impact. But again, there are so many dimensions to consider. There's the environmental impact and how you're preserving biodiversity and ecosystems and wildlife. And then there's, the social impacts as well, and in terms of inclusion and women's empowerment. So there's so many areas where you could look at to measure. And oftentimes, we can want to over measure. And I think it becomes very complicated. So I think a couple of things before any project where you want to measure what the impact is over time, being very intentional about what it is that you want to measure, what is most material, and keeping in mind the context of the local communities. We don't want to spend time with vanity metrics, right? We need to define going in, what are the goals, what are the outcomes that we want to see, and what are the outputs that we can measure to start to understand if we're generating those outcomes and ultimately the right impact. So I think, again, it's a wide conversation about measuring impact, but one of the most basic things you can ask, again, if you're really trying to understand the impact, is the impact should be defined by the people that are impacted. So, it's really about going into the local communities and quite simply asking, did the quality of your life improve? And that's something that you can measure across projects. That it's a very simple metric, and of course it's subjective, but if what you're trying to do is have positive impact on livelihoods, who better to ask than the people that are impacted? So I think that's again, maybe a simple answer, but often we find simplicity on the far side of complexity. And I think it really is about, if you're trying to have that impact and you're not just trying to report out to your funders or other stakeholders, which that's who we are. When we invest, we're trying to understand what is the actual impact, again, on the place, but especially the people. So I think it really comes down to, asking the people, how did this project actually impact you and affect your quality of life? And so we really try to stay true to that. We of course gather metrics on an annual basis from the projects that we invest in. But again, I think it's really getting down to the level of the community and interacting with people, because that's why we're in this work.
I saw that Stuart was nodding as you were speaking, so I guess that he has some ideas that are in line with those that you have just explained.
Oh, well, I mean, definitely what Sarah's saying about you need to ask the local people. I mean, in my travels around and around and around in circles, you see these projects where, like, a well-meaning foreigner, a traveler, has said, "Yeah, this is nice. I'll set up here. I'll set up a project," and then for whatever reason they move on, and because that the impetus of the project hasn't really come from the local community, more often than not, it doesn't last. And so you can't expect everybody to always stick around forever. And like when I was on Malapascua, there was another project that had been set up by a European couple that showed tremendous promise, and they were doing lots of good stuff. They had to leave because of the pandemic, and it hasn't really got back on its feet since then. The other project, which is much more vested and coming from the local community, what is important to them, what they want, and is important to them, is still going. So I think there's a really big tendency for inbound tour companies and that kind of thing to sort of instill what they need on local communities, and saying, talking about carbon emissions or something like that, you guys have to sort this out. But they're not going to the airlines and saying, sort that out. And that's a much bigger part of the equation. So this kind of thing does need to come from the local community for sure.
Yeah. So what I see is
And
that local stewardship is at the very base of everything. So you have to take into account the local community from the very beginning and not get there when 1 year later and say, well, we are doing this. I hope you're okay with it. And you have to be responsible for the impact.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I
And
mean, oh, sorry, Sarah.
I
Go ahead.
No worries. We're clearly both, I'm sure we could have a huge conversation about solely this, which I think we should. It has to be participatory from the beginning, right? If you don't have that local buy-in and really respecting that the local people are going to know their local context the best, then you're going to end up with failed projects. And the other thing I wanted to highlight too is, obviously the impacts that we're trying to create are long-term, but we don't want to wait to start gathering some of the data about how things are working until we could see that long-term impact. Like ideally the things that we're doing might take years to really kind of trickle down to the economy, things like that. But what can you understand today? Like that isn't an excuse not to be engaging and gathering data. Like what is going well right now? What can you measure now? Knowing that of course there's going to be some longitudinal data if you're trying to understand impact. And again, I think it's about how you do that, even how you gather the data and what kind of things you're asking for is, again, that all needs to be determined with the local community. So Stuart, go ahead. Sorry, jump in there.
No, I was just going to say, I just wanted to clarify. I'm not sort of saying that a foreign hand is bad at all, but what I am, like, it can be very useful, particularly if it's full of money. But what I am saying is that the impetus needs to come from the local community. And if it isn't,
they have to
then
want you to be there, and they give you the license to operate.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, especially if, as you were saying, Sarah, if we want the project or the initiative to have like impact in the future and to continue long term, because if not, if they are not taking it as their own initiative in a kind of way, even if it's not their own, it's not going to last a very long time. It's going to be very short and not have a good future. So
yeah, and good intentions are not enough. I'll
yeah.
just say that as well. So
Yeah.
And talking about Southeast Asia, we know that some years ago it was all about slow travel. But would you say that this is still the case today, or how has it changed over the years?
Well, it's still possible to travel slowly. I mean, you don't need to get on the plane if you don't want to. But it has definitely changed. Like I said, I've been traveling around here since the early 90s, and it is far easier to get around than it used to be. Travel patterns have changed. Gap year travelers, which used to be an important sector of the inbound market, are not the same anymore, or not in the same volume, sorry. And with the low cost airlines, carriers like AirAsia have just completely changed how people travel. So it's possible to sort of say, well, I'm going to go to I don't know, Angkor Wat for a weekend from Singapore, and where previously, I mean, you'd have to be fairly loaded to have done that, and now you can do it for I don't know, $100 or something crazy like that. So there's a lot of that kind of thing, and people are seeing more in less time, which is this is sort of the antithesis of slow travel. So it used to be like when, I mean, I don't want to be the guy who says you should have been here yesterday, but it used to be that Vietnam was largely closed, Laos was very difficult, Cambodia was pretty dodgy. And so people would come to Thailand and they would spend 3 or 4 months in Thailand. And so in that time, you could cover a lot of ground. And there were all these secondary and tertiary destinations that were superb spots to go. And they all had little locally owned guest houses, restaurants, that kind of thing, that were sort of, nobody was making huge pay dirt, but everything was sort of ticking over. But as those other countries opened up, which has been great, I'm not saying that they should have stayed closed, but as they have opened up and flights have come on, now people are coming for the same period, but they're seeing 4 countries instead of one. And so you end up with these bucket list kind of itineraries where people are, you know, they've looked at, I don't know, Travel and Leisure or something that said, like, here's the top 5 places to go in Southeast Asia. And so that's where they go. And that's not slow travel. It's not sustainable travel. I mean, yes, you get to tick off all of these places, but that's about it, you know. And I don't think that has been good for the region. That said, I mean, if you are happy to bum around and take your time, I mean, places like Indonesia, it's at the cutting, like it's, I think, the best country in Southeast Asia for long haul travel. So, but there's not many people doing it because there's too many other things to tick off,
Yeah.
and it's too easy.
Is there a magic number of the amount of time that we should be in one place to consider it slow travel or to actually get to know the place?
Well, I'm a travel writer by trade, well, more or less, and my maxim is that a travel writer sees everything and experiences nothing because you're forever on the move. You know it, and like that's what I've been doing for 20 years. So here I am talking about slow travel. It's certainly not what I've been practicing, but everywhere is worth a night. Even Sihanoukville is worth a night. It's just, if you don't know Cambodia, it's a particularly armpitish town, but anywhere is worth a couple of nights. And no, I don't think there is a magic number. I mean, we lived in Bangkok for 7 years, and I spent a lot of that time in Bangkok. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think there is a magic number. What do you reckon, Sarah?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's not. It's also not an absolute. You know, it's not an either this or that. You know, you could travel more slowly within your means, and I think we do need to highlight accessibility in a variety of ways too, as you have on previous webinars. Not everyone can go and just spend a month in a destination, and so I think you also start to think about what's the mindset that you can go in with when you're a slow traveler. I think there's much more intention before you find yourself in a destination of what are some of the things that you want to do, what's a theme that you want to focus on, what are some places that you want to frequent, and just kind of put yourself in that posture of wanting to receive and not just to simply be there. And as you said, Stuart, just kind of check off things. And it's intentionality of everything from that humility and how you interact and spending time learning from people and not necessarily just sharing where you're from. Of course, people will be curious, but really trying to to get to know people on that human level and connect in an authentic way. And it's even things like, where are you going to spend your money is an aspect of slow travel. So even if you find yourself somewhere for 4 days, I think one of the things is, okay, well then how can I get closest to the community? How can I think about keeping my money in this community? We all know about, the leakage problem, right? And so how can you, again, it's imperfect maybe of knowing exactly, the ownership structure of this restaurant or this accommodation, but I think it's that intention of wanting to keep the dollars in the local economy, wanting to create those human connections. And again, just that posture of how you show up as a traveler or tourist, spending the time to know what are some of the cultural norms so that you don't show up and make a faux pas. I think that's all, you can incorporate slow travel principles, even if you find yourself with only a week in Indonesia, for example.
Yeah. I wrote a piece last year about slow travel, talking about Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and what I used as the example, because people go there and there's all the top tier museums and blah 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 blah, and I said just go there and spend a day on a city block. Just restrict yourself to one block. And it sounds ridiculous, but it's easily a day's worth of experiences in any city block. I mean, I remember years ago I was in New York City and I walked from Central Park to what was then the World Trade Center. Took me all day. I think it was like 100 blocks or something, and it was like walking through 58 different countries. New York, it's such an incredible city. You cross a road and you've just crossed the equator, kind of thing. But I could just as easily have spent a day in each of those city blocks. And so this is what it comes to, like a mindset thing. But also what Sarah was talking about was the whole educative process before you even get there, of figuring out, okay, how do things work? How do I not behave like an idiot? How am I respectful towards local people? And like for spending your money, it's I mean, you can go into a restaurant and say, can I see your papers of certification so I can see your owners? But who's going to do that? But I mean, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, then it's most likely a duck. So it's like what Sarah was talking about earlier with the various certification schemes and all that kind of stuff. And yes, they're important. They can play a role. They do play a role, but like to a travel consumer, they're hugely confusing. And often you're best to go with your gut. And, so doing a bit of research beforehand, so you're not going to be such an encumbrance upon the community. And that takes time as well. So, the more you learn, the lighter your step.
Exactly. And that's not to say, we might still, make mistakes or have a faux pas here and there, but I think, it's again, and then I think the other thing to mention too is, in addition to, how you show up in communities and how you, behave like a responsible tourist, I think it's this really is, it's the way to travel that has a lighter footprint, but it's also, I think, the most meaningful for the individual traveler. I think sometimes we think about that, oh, surely I'll get enjoyment, from taking pictures in front of all of these places and, not to, but social media, and I think media in general encourages, like, this is what travel looks like. But for those of us who have traveled, sometimes the most meaningful things are that person you weren't expecting to meet, that you just get in a conversation with. They've actually traveled to the part of the world that you're from, and you start having these cool, really off the cuff conversations. Or you find yourself in some place, and, well, where do we eat? I don't know, but there's this little place over there, and then you have the best food ever in that country. So if you overschedule or try to have too many plans, or you're as you mentioned, Stuart, you're just looking at, well, what are the best places in X city, you're going to miss out on the actual magic. That's the magic of travel. And so I think it's really, it's not just that it's good for communities or good for the planet. Like, really think about it, it's good for you as the traveler to be doing it this way, because that's the richness of it, right? That's why we should travel.
Yeah, for sure.
And these principles, I guess, they can be applied to our daily lives as well. We can become travelers in our own city and apply these principles, and actually not
Hmm.
having
I
this
love
bucket
that.
list. We are always looking for the best coffee in town. Maybe just get lost and find, have a surprise and find something that you weren't expecting to find. Mm,
I love
Yeah.
that.
mm.
Lucia, can I slip in with one more very quick example?
Sure, if you have
Just
some
like,
examples to illustrate what we are talking about in Southeast Asia,
yeah,
if you could do so.
it's
Yeah.
just something Sarah said brought it to mind. Again, it's a piece I wrote last year, but it when I was in Cambodia many years ago, I met a woman from North America. She was an older woman, and her daughter had been a very keen backpacker traveler, and she had returned from a trip and had an accident and died. And her mother, when she was cleaning up her rooms and stuff later on, found all of these diaries that she didn't even know existed. And when she started looking through, the daughter had kept these incredibly intricate diaries and business cards and all this stuff about all of her adventures in Southeast Asia. So the woman had taken it upon herself to go back to Southeast Asia, somewhere she had never been, and try and find as many of these people from these diaries that the daughter had written about. So when I met her in Battambang, a town in Western Cambodia, she was just some woman in a cafe, and we just got talking, and we ended up spending ages together.
Yeah.
And it was just the most moving story. And she would tell me how she I think it was in Bangkok, I can't remember. She went to a guest house, found the owner. There was a photo and all this kind of thing, and she showed, and the owner said of the daughter, "Oh, she was such a shiny coin," you know. And it was just, it's these are the kind of relationships you make when you make the effort to put yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone and that kind of thing within reason, you know, like and it had been life changing for this woman, and it was one of the most memorable meetings I've had. Oh, in all of my travels, it was really something else. But yeah, and well, she was definitely a slow traveler. Anyway, that's it.
That's such a moving story.
It
Thank you
was
for
really,
sharing. Yeah, that's
yeah,
so sweet.
yeah.
Hmm. So now I guess that we have some entrepreneurs here in the audience that may be looking into how to develop projects in local communities. So, what would you say that are some of the common challenges that are associated with impact-driven tourism initiatives, and how do you think that they can be solved and overcome?
I think one of the main challenges is something that we talked about earlier is how do you make sure that you're engaging the local stakeholders and giving local people that primary voice in whatever you're doing? So if you're creating that kind of tourism initiative, again, this isn't maybe popular, but it's taking your time to get set up to make sure you're doing it in the right way. Otherwise, these good intentions can actually sometimes lead to negative impacts, like not just not create the positive impact, but actually create a negative impact. And so I think that's a definite challenge for sure. um, I think in terms of some other challenges, it's how do you balance, for example, sometimes like accessibility versus positive social and environmental impact. I think we all can think of examples of where having experiences or consuming products that are higher in impact are more inaccessible in terms of cost and things like that. So how do you balance those things, right? Wanting to make sure that for example, your tour can be accessible to everyone, and yet the business model works in such a way that money is flowing direct to the people it should be flowing. So figuring out how to make that business model work is, I think, sometimes challenging. And so then it's sometimes good to have partners on your side that can help you think through that, or exemplars to look to see, well, how did they do that. And yeah, I think it's also going in with, again, the challenge of wanting to create that positive impact, what I said before, of outlining from the very beginning what's the impact that you want to create, and how do you do your initiative without degrading, local culture too? How can you really be part of preserving it? So, and there are a variety of other challenges. I mean, there are challenges to entrepreneurship. There are challenges to the travel and tourism industry. So you put them together, and it's going to be fairly challenging. And sometimes it's a matter of not having access to resources too, or the seasonality of tourism, and so that's kind of where actors like us can come into play, with some interesting things like revenue-based financing to help you scale your tourism initiatives, but more on that later. So, and yeah, would love to hear from you, Stuart.
I think looking at it from a traveler's perspective, like from the outside looking in, when travelers are looking at tour companies that are offering these kind of, positive impact trips, is to really ask hard questions. When companies are saying, for example, we're only using local workers or whatever, or local companies, it's like, well, what do you mean by local? Because let's say G Adventures does something very dodgy with they have this Ripple score thing that says how much local participation there is in their companies, and it's pretty iffy when companies are claiming to be environmentally not doing too much damage and that kind of stuff. Like, ask the hard questions. Ask, how are you measuring it? If they're doing things that are involving local communities, is it like a dog and pony show, or is it something that does the community want you to be there? And this is so often a thing that's missing. This is tourism wide. It's not just specific to tourism, to tour groups, but local communities need a bigger seat at the table. People need to be asking local communities, do you even want me to be here? And I know in practice, that's a really difficult thing to ask. It's like, I just got off a train, I didn't know, but you need to be thinking about that kind of stuff as well. And so in taking a tour, in a way, you sort of outsource that thought process, but that doesn't mean that the company gets a pass. You should still be asking them the hard questions, what are their relationships with wherever it is they're taking you.
Yeah. And I guess that some mistakes are going to be made because we all make mistakes. But what would you say that are a couple of things that people have to have in mind and do not make those couple of mistakes?
Oh. How long have we got?
Just one, just one, not even two, one.
Like this is like a really small thing. Anyone from a Western country coming to Southeast Asia is looking at a long haul flight to get here. So it's going to be anything from 6 to, who knows, some ungodly number of hours. Spend a couple of hours on that flight learning a bit of language. You don't need to be able to talk about the Communist Manifesto in Thai, but you can learn how to count. You can learn how to say thank you. You can learn how to say please. That these kind of like really simple things, if you don't even bother with that, what are you doing? And you're on the plane. I mean, you've got no excuse really. Like, language isn't my forte for sure, but these are really simple things, and you're giving the people in the destination an indication that you are willing to make that small effort, and that's better than somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in those moments, if you're trying, it can turn into kind of a funny moment of, maybe you're mispronouncing something, or maybe you can teach them, or, so I think you're setting yourself up for failure if you don't prepare yourself that way. And again, I'll go back to my point of like enlightened self-interest. You're going to miss out as a traveler if you're not thinking through those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to the Reset Tourism Fund, Sarah, if you can explain a little bit about the UnTours Foundation very quickly, and how this Reset Tourism Fund works, and what kind of initiatives are you looking for?
Yeah, so we created the Reset Tourism Fund because, there's a lot of people talking about, the potential of tourism to create a better world, but not necessarily enough capital that is flowing to the businesses that are doing that. 80% of the businesses in the tourism industry are small businesses. They're on the front lines of travel and tourism. And so, oftentimes when we think about investing in any companies, we think, about who's scalable and where are the unicorns. And that's very much not our approach. If you've heard of the whole unicorn versus zebra kind of argument, we really want to fund the organizations that are in local communities that can create that local impact when they increase their revenue, for example. And so the Reset Tourism Fund is all about recognizing that there is huge potential of travel and tourism to create positive impacts, and finding those world-changing entrepreneurs that are creating not only strong social and economic impact, but they're also not only minimizing their negative impact, but proactively trying to be part of regenerating local environments. And so, again, we're looking to find those companies, those tour operators, those lodges, those museums, those any organizations that are serving travel and tourism. Even B2B platforms. I will say we do also invest in tech and in startups, but really we're most looking at again these local businesses in destinations. So yeah, that's a little bit about what the Reset Tourism Fund aims to do. What that looks like in practice is, we're looking for companies that align with those things, and then providing check sizes from just 10 to 100,000 US. So they're fairly small investments, but that's because of who we're targeting. And the other thing too is we're not trying to be a typical investor either. We actually often talk about we aim to be the friendliest investor that an entrepreneur can have. So we're really trying to make our capital accessible, provided at the lowest cost, offer things like revenue-based financing so that you're only paying back an investment based on the percentage of your revenue, so that in the low season, if you make no revenue, you don't owe us anything. And so we're really trying to put impact first, and again, find these companies that are doing the real work and helping them take that next step forward with just a little bit of extra resources. So yeah, and I saw you pulled up some of the examples. We've invested in Peru, in Kenya, Australia, and right now we do have a real focus on investing in companies that are making travel and tourism accessible, especially to BIPOC travelers, to youth travelers, to women travelers, LGBTQ travelers, because again, we're talking about all of these positive benefits that it can bring to a person when you travel. Everyone should be able to experience that, and unfortunately, not everyone can. So we've also invested in companies like Green Book Global, which is all about the Black travel experience. We've invested in a company in Australia that provides experiences for neurodivergent youth, and using travel as a way to connect with one another and to build confidence. I could go into so many examples, and you can kind of see that there are so many types of positive impacts that can be created through travel and tourism companies. And so we're just looking for the best of the best, and trying to help them grow, and partnering alongside and being part of that process, which just kind of comes hand in hand whenever you provide capital, but really trying to do that in a way that is responsible and that puts impact at the fore.
And I guess that your fund doesn't get to every single initiative. It's not appropriate for every single business. So do you have any other recommendations about other funds that people could be looking into?
Absolutely. So I think, especially if you're a smaller enterprise, and again, we fund either nonprofit organizations or for-profits, there is, obviously grant funding that is worth going after. So some of our funding partners, To We Care Foundation, Expedia Group, they have really great programs. If you're, a small community-based tourism enterprise looking for grant funding for donations, there are so many resources out there, and investment is not right for everyone. And we certainly have that conversation with folks too. We don't want to overextend them. So there are a lot of other resources out there. Some of them, you can find on our website. You can also connect with me directly. Really, we just want to point people in the best direction. So if folks aren't a fit for our investment, we can pass them along to either bigger organizations actually, or ones that can kind of meet you where you're at. So those are just a couple of funding programs. The Made to Travel Fund comes to mind. So yeah, lots of resources out there. And if you need help navigating those, reach out to folks like myself.
Great. Thank you so much for this quick explanation. Anyways, I invite everybody to go and have a deeper look in the link that I'm sure that Maria will be sharing on the comment section. And of course, if they have any questions later on, they can reach out to you. And just we are getting to the final moments of this webinar. So I wanted to bring up a hot topic, kind of a difficult question that I guess that nobody has a good answer for, but just opening the topic. So you know that there's kind of a paradox between us wanting to preserve the local culture and also avoiding, even if it's not on purpose, the modernization of this local community, of this destination, and it not becoming exotic enough for us, or however we want to call it. So how do you think that this can be, I don't know if solved, but what's your take on it?
For me, sorry, just to jump in, Stuart, but I'm really curious to hear your take on this too. But for me, it comes back to have you checked what the local community actually wants, and have they actually, organized and given a chance for all voices to be heard? So I'll come full circle and mention Kapawi Eco Lodge. With the prize money that they won from our pitch competition, they're putting on a summit where they're going to gather hundreds of people from across the local communities that comprise the Achuar nations, and they're going to have a days-long summit where they talk about where do we want to go next in terms of how we are bringing in travelers into our communities and how we're doing tourism. And I mean, for anyone that's familiar with the work of community development, this is not something that's easy, right? And so it's one thing to say, well, the community should decide. Well, the community is made of many, many people too. So, but I do think it's really important that it comes from the community, and they've spoken with all of those that will be impacted. So it's not easy, but I think it's really that question of how are we centering the people that are impacted in this conversation of what the impacts will be. Do they really want to preserve their local culture, and that's the crux of what the tourism experience wants to be about? Or are they looking for good jobs? And so they're willing to, if you come in and bring your westernized coffee shop. But again, I think it's what those communities decide that they want for themselves. So that's how I'll just kind of start off this conversation.
Just before I answer this, I just wanted to tackle a question that was in the comments from Conscious Travel Collective. Sorry to jump backwards, but I'll just answer this very quickly because I think it's important. They say, Stuart, travelers aren't asking these questions not because they don't care, but they don't realize the importance. It's the role of the industry to say, this is the criteria to use and why it matters. I'm very leery of that because it's a fox and a hen house kind of thing. And if travelers put as much time into researching sustainability, what they should be doing, that kind of stuff, as they do to finding a cheap flight or finding a cheap hotel, then we wouldn't be in the mess that we are. A lot of this responsibility does rest with consumers. People need to educate themselves. And I think going to a company who has a vested interest in you buying something off them doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to the most impartial information source. So that was, I just wanted to get that out just because of this. But regarding what you're talking about here, like I'm just going to echo largely what Sarah said, that you need to go back to the local community, but you can't talk about a community. It's not this like cohesive ball thing that everyone thinks the same thing. I mean, if anyone's like, it's like island nations, the smaller the country, the more crazy the politics are. So, I mean, but that's why it needs to come from them. There are going to be people in that community that don't want tourists there. There are going to be people who want a Starbucks. There are going to be people who want to weave baskets. And that consensus, what is going to work from them has to come from them. So when you have a tour company coming in and saying, we think you should weave baskets so we can bring people and see you weave baskets, that's all well and good if that's what the community wants to do, and it needs to come from them. And so that's why it's quite complicated.
Great, thank you. So just a final statement from your side. If we are travelers looking for locally owned initiatives, how do we go about it? How do we find them? do we need help from others? We can do it individually.
It's hard. I mean, I would
Yeah.
revert back to what I said before. If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a
Mhm.
duck. I mean, that's difficult to research from afar, but it's not impossible.
Mhm.
Contact people beforehand. People need to put as much effort into this as they do finding the right hotel and finding a cheap flight and all that other stuff. So it's a bit of a changing your focus, and at the end of the day, slow travel comes from here. It's a state of mind, and it doesn't matter whether you're somewhere for a day or a decade. um, it all starts in here.
Mhm. I think it's a balance of what you're saying, Stuart, of taking that time beforehand to research. I mean, check social media. Not all these local, especially smaller operations, are going to actually have much of a web presence either. So definitely check
Mm,
those things, and look to see, how are they engaging with the local community? What initiatives are they talking about, and what are they prioritizing? But then it's that balance of doing that, and then just show up and walk around and keep your eyes open, right? I think we can't underestimate just like that, just going somewhere and observing, and taking the time to ask people, hey, I want to visit this type of place. What do you recommend? And just spend some time too. So I think it's that balance of not over scheduling and actually planning some time where you can just kind of be and feel things out once you're in destination, because again, some of these things are not going to be widely advertised, to you back
mm,
where you're from. And so I think, look for places that have certifications because you know that they'll have that positive impact, but then those things aren't always accessible. So sometimes you simply just need to show up, and ask people, like, what are the cool things happening in your community? Who should we go see? Where's the best food? Throw in some, local language, or do your best. And
mm.
again, I think a lot of it comes from those like directly sourced organic human connections and
Yeah.
Yeah,
relationships.
Mm.
yeah. I mean, it's also, you don't climb Everest in a day. So if for people who have never traveled before, it also says, oh my god, it's like
Mm,
it's far out. I can't do that. One of the things I do now is I get off on purpose. I get off the train or get off the bus at the wrong stop, and I just figure it out. And that's not going to work for everybody. But doing something like walking around the block is a good start. And it's just this progression of trying more and more things, that you don't jump right out of your comfort zone on day one, but you work, it's a progression.
Yeah, and
Start
speak to
somewhere.
people. People are happy to speak to you and let them know that you are there and looking for a place to eat or whatever, and they will be happy to share. So that's one of the
mm,
main points. Don't be afraid to talk to people and get and
mhm.
connect
Mm,
with the local community. So
yeah,
I do like the
yeah,
comment that just showed up too, that there are resources too. I recognize that, again,
yeah,
for those who are not
yeah.
wanting to jump straight in, there are a variety of resources. We actually have a crew of influencers that you can follow, that they're already going into communities, and you can, replicate some of their tours and travels as well. So yeah, just look around at those places, and follow the folks who are embodying kind of everything that we talked about, and I think you'll find yourself in the right spot.
yeah, you are not
Yeah,
alone. That's the main message.
Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
So where can people find you, Sarah and Stuart, if they want to engage with you and connect?
For us, go to untoursfoundation.org. You can learn about the foundation. We have LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. You can link to it all from there, and we'd love to connect. If you're looking for funding, or if you're looking to get involved with this kind of initiative, would love to hear from you. Yeah, so that's where you can find me. Also personally on LinkedIn as well. So Sarah Payne.
Great.
Um, You'll get me on, LinkedIn. I don't use Twitter anymore, unfortunately. So the Threads, Mastodon, Instagram on a slow day. Um, but it'll always be Travelfish something or other, and you'll find me there somewhere.
Great. So thank you so much for joining me today. This has been like a great conversation. I wish we had 2 more hours to discuss, but
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately it's over.
Yep.
So I encourage everyone to be attentive and connect with you if they want to find out more about what you do and your initiatives and projects. And yes, this is the final webinar that I will be hosting for the Slow Travel Network, but you will have another one on the 15th of November. There, the focus will be on slow travel influencers. So make sure you register on the Slow Travel Network that is in Travel Massive, and stay updated for the next webinars and the next stories that we will be sharing. So thank you so much for joining today. I hope you have enjoyed this webinar, and I wish you a great afternoon, morning, or whatever you are joining us from, morning, afternoon, or whatever, or night. So thank you so much to both of you and to our audience for bearing with us, and see you next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.